So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, great saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. Beloved Lord, we offer you our hands and feet, our minds and our hearts, for you to use in service of thy light. Guide us and bless us as we act as thy channels. Om. Peace. Amen.
Our hands to welcome the sun. Join us. Many hands make a miracle. Let's all join hands together. Life on earth is so wonderful. When people laugh and dance and struggle as friends, and all their dreams achieve their ends. Many hands make a miracle. People climbing mountain peak we hazard as one. We lift our hands to welcome the sun. We lift our hands to welcome the sun.
Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody.
Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy love. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy love.
Let's again begin by invoking the power of the soul. Everyone. Awake and ready. And how is everyone?
Awake and ready.
Okay. That doesn't get us started right, then we are in trouble. So, as we have said, that we're working on the 3 pillars of our path, which yesterday was sadhana, today we're talking about service, and tomorrow we'll talk about attunement. So, to talk about service, I want to also let everybody know that I am working on a book on service. And it came about in a very interesting manner. The idea for the book came about in a very interesting manner. It was last fall, and we were in India. Devi and I and Dhyana and our dear friend Pia had visited our work in Vrindavan. For those of you who don't know, we have a charitable trust, the Paramahansa Yogananda Public Charitable Trust, that has been formed specifically to help people and for the upliftment of society. In its origin at this point, it's going to spread, but at this point, we're working with several thousand widows in Vrindavan, and they go there because in Indian society, sometimes when the husband dies, the wife is thrown out on the street, either for economic reasons or superstition, that it was her bad karma that caused the death of the husband, whatever. They're, in many cases, penniless, and they have no place to go and nobody who will take them in, so they make their way to Vrindavan in the hopes that Krishna, which that's his city, will take care of them. Well, Krishna is Babaji, and so he inspired us to help in fulfilling that task for him. So on a daily basis, we feed about 2,000 widows with fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, milk, and whatever they need. On a monthly basis, we give grains and so on to about 5,000 or 6,000 widows and elderly. We also help elderly sadhus and so on. And then we provide also free care medically and in other ways. But the most important thing of all is that our people go and visit each of these widows on a regular basis. So that what we're really trying to do is not just act as a charity that works with them on the need of food and medical care, but we want to be the living heart and soul of Babaji, of Krishna, and to show these women who are unfortunate in their circumstances that somebody cares about them. They haven't been abandoned. And so we're trying to bring that living representative. Now, we have a staff there of about 90 people. And over the last couple of years, that staff has gradually become not only more and more trained, but more and more in tune. And in the last year, we have had teachers coming from New Delhi and Gurgaon, which is about 3 hours away. Teachers have come on a weekly basis in order to give classes in meditation and, discipleship and so on. And now over a third of the staff has taken discipleship in our path, and many are moving on toward Kriya. So it's a very, very beautiful work. The day after, the four of us, plus the head of the work in Vrindavan, a man named Manjunath, we were gathered together in a hotel room, a restaurant in a hotel that was convenient. And we were talking about the work and the practical aspects of it and what needed to be done, because we're the kind of guiding group that guides the vision for that work. And we were then moved on to talking about how wonderful it was that these staff people were now becoming devotees and were really becoming in tune with the purpose for which we had started the charitable work, which was not just to help people physically, but to help in the upliftment of consciousness. And they were really beginning to understand that and learning things like energization and teaching that to the people that they were working with, and meditation, and so that the real work is, as I say, in consciousness and uplifting the minds and the souls of these people. And so then Manjunath mentioned that after this training, many people in the staff were meditating regularly every day, some of them as much as a half hour. And it struck me, that's beautiful, but they're meditating a half hour a day, and we've been training them in that for nearly a year. They're serving 8 or 10 hours a day. And we haven't been training them consciously in the attitudes or the liberating power of service. And then, Master said that our path, he defined our path as meditation plus service. He said, you will never get there if you do not serve. And he was very powerful about it. We have a huge array of things to help people meditate. We have books, we have classes, we have videos, we have online courses, we have lots and lots of things of that nature. We don't have anything to train people in how to have service be a pathway to liberation. And so with that thought, I just realized that maybe I needed to begin to think about how either a course or something. And then the thought of a book came. And while the others were talking, I just sat and for about 15 minutes I asked the waiter for pencil and paper, which they bring post haste in India. They love to serve. And so I was writing down the thoughts as they occurred to me. And I felt a great wave of blessing from it. I felt like it was Babaji guiding the thoughts for this book. So at any rate, I'm now engaged on writing a book in service. And so this morning I'll talk a little about that. But more than just about the book, I'll talk about the principles in the book and what's really important for us. So the first chapter is to talk about the fact that service really can be a pathway to liberation. That it isn't just something that is nice to do or gets projects done in an inexpensive way, and that kind of attitude, but that it absolutely can be a pathway to true liberation. And there's a difference between, it's hard to use these terms exactly, what's the difference between work and service, but there's a difference between that kind of activity which is done because it produces something back for us. So many people work very, very hard at their jobs, but working at their jobs, they expect a paycheck, they expect praise, they expect maybe promotions, they expect to become the district manager. whatever it is, they have an expectation, and that brings that energy back to the ego. And as long as the energy is brought back to the ego, or I should say to the extent that it's brought back to the ego, it strengthens the delusion of the ego, of our separate entity as separate from the universe. But Seva is different from that. Seva, to be done properly, and especially the name of the book is Ananda Seva. And it's meant to be a companion to, the lessons in meditation is used throughout the world as kind of the manual to train people at the beginning stage of meditation. This is meant to be a companion volume. So Ananda Seva, lessons in selfless service or joyful service. But coming back to the theme here, so Seva is different because to the extent that it is done purely and without any desire for any return coming back to the ego, then it becomes extremely freeing to the ego. And so in our work days, for instance, almost everyone comes and just gives their service without any thought that they're going to get anything back in return. They aren't going to get any pay for it. They aren't going to get any praise necessarily, maybe a general thanks to everybody for, and look at all we've accomplished, and so on. But that kind of service, anything that we do to serve others without the thought coming back is freeing. In the Bhagavad Gita, this is covered almost, I would guess that a quarter of the Bhagavad Gita is on the concept of service or activity, and in the Gita it's called Nishkam Karma. It's activity without that activity being tied back to the ego, and therefore it is freeing. Activity without any expectation for the fruits of that activity. So as we engage in service of that nature, it becomes freeing to us. But so coming back to the book, the first chapter, which to a large extent we set the tone yesterday, the first chapter talks about how God became this universe, and therefore everything in the universe is God. And that the problem that we have, the difficulty that we have, is the problem of ego, the soul being identified with the body or personality, or with the bundle of self-definitions by which we separate ourselves from the universe around us. So real service, the kind that is freeing to the ego, is done without referring back energy to that egoic delusion. And because God has created this universe, then everything in it is an aspect of God. And so then we need to move on beyond just kind of a vague sense that, it's all God's world. Master said, for instance, that we should do selfless service. He often said that. But we cannot be passive in that. He said, someone asked him a question about serving and the freedom. And, if God is the doer, why don't we just let God do it? And he answered quite strongly, at this point, because we don't realize yet that we're unified with God, we have that separation of ego, then the better attitude is that we are the doer, but we're doing it with God's given power and with God's energy that is flowing through us. And that's a bridge from the concept of I, my, me, mine and everything is God, and only God exists, and only God is serving. We have to get from the egoic consciousness to that expanded consciousness. Obviously, as we talked yesterday, meditation and sadhana is a primary way by which we cross over that bridge. But service too can be a very, very valid means of crossing that bridge. So the difference between work, if we can call it that, which is done for personal reward of some nature or another, and service, which is done without any expectation of that, is the difference between that which encrusts the ego even further and that which begins to, one could say, loosen the ego or begin to dissolve it or begin to work out the knots of that ego. So just working hard is not Ananda Seva, no matter how hard you work, as long as there's that egoic tie to it. So Ananda Seva, I think the point is clear, is that which is meant to free us from that. So then I move on in the second chapter to talk about kind of the means of expanding the consciousness. And I start with the story, which most of you have heard, but it's very important here. And that's that late in his life, Master was taking on karma of the disciples and the world. And one of the ways that he was doing that was to take it on physically on his body, especially with his legs and knees. And there were times when he was in so much pain from that, because the masters do feel pain unless they choose to withdraw from it. We'll talk more about this tomorrow, but I found this fascinating. Somebody asked Master, if you're in Nirvikalpa Samadhi and you know everything about everyone, why is it that you kind of don't automatically just do these things for them or automatically, focus on them? He said, it's very difficult to both be in cosmic consciousness and work through a human body and a human mind at the same time. And he used this analogy that it's like a gardener. The gardener is aware of the whole garden, but if he's working on a particular flower, he's paying attention to that flower or that little patch, even though he's aware of the whole area. And this was Swami talking with him, and so Swami mentioned then that some monk was having trouble, and as soon as Master concentrated his human mind on that person, he said, "Oh, I see what you mean." And a few weeks later, that monk left the monastery. But see, there's a balance in there, and we too are subject to that balance. We may know intellectually that only God exists. We may know intellectually that all service is just God serving God, but we aren't at a position where we can hold that. So coming back to the story, Master was taking on the karma of his disciples. And his knees were so painful that he couldn't walk, so there were a couple of the monks were carrying him down the stairs at Mount Washington. And he thanked them for their service to him, for helping him. And they said, "Oh, no, Master, we thank you. This is a wonderful opportunity to give back to you a little bit of what you've given to us all these years." And he just smiled blissfully, and he said, "God serving God, that's his drama." And so the second chapter is about God serving God. That's his drama. Remember yesterday when we were talking about Swami and what he said about the summation of the spiritual path? longer and deeper meditation. All the spiritual path is to dissolve the ego. It's longer and deeper meditation and seeing God as the doer in everything. And so we need to make the leap, but it starts with trying to be aware of the fact that it is God serving through us. And there's a cluster of attitudes, which I'll talk about in a little while, but a cluster of attitudes which help us with that. But the essence here is that the more we think that we're the doer, the more, even if we're serving selflessly, if there's the remnant of the thought that it is I who is serving selflessly, I who is not expecting any reward, I who is doing nishkam karma. See, even that, then it brings us, certainly nishkam karma brings us a long ways, but it can't take us beyond the point until we engage the consciousness that we are not doing the service, that it is only God who is serving through us, because only God exists in all the universe. But that's a hard mental state, hard state of consciousness to actually stay in. You know, we can affirm it a little bit. We can feel in deep meditation that everything in this universe is made of light or made of God, and that we're just part of that universal thing. But as we come back to activity, generally speaking, coming back into the body breaks us away from that expanded consciousness. So one of the elements of true Ananda Seva is that we have to fight against that tendency to, once we leave the quietness, remember we were talking about how the essence of our meditational path is the withdrawal of prana and the upliftment of that prana to the spiritual eye. But here, we have to take that prana, bring it back down into the body, begin to act with the body, and yet still hold on to that higher state of consciousness. And so it's a challenge to do so, but it is an essential step along the way that we do so. And so it's good to have affirmations or chants or anything the Lord Most High. It's a beautiful song for that. Any of those kinds of things that remind our consciousness that it's not we who are doing this, it's only God doing it through us. It's a very good practice to try to do something after you leave the meditation room that is simple and more or less routine. Don't immediately go to email or to news or to the internet that engages the mind. That's like, let me take all this wonderful prana that I have gathered and uplifted, and I'll sell it to you, Mr. Yahoo.com or whatever. I'll just give it away. You know, make a bridge so that the first period after meditation, you consciously are trying to stay inward and keep your consciousness uplifted while still doing some activity. But the more you can affirm and beyond that actually feel and experience that you aren't doing, you aren't cooking the breakfast. It's God who's cooking the breakfast to you. You aren't eating the meal. It's God that is eating the meal, and so on. So making that bridge is very important. Then as we talk about Ananda Seva specifically, there are different kind of levels to our service. And they follow I had an insight, I hope that it's true. I'm trying to do this book with as much attunement as I can so that I'm really trying to feel what I've just been talking about, that it is God writing this book through me. So at any rate, I had this insight that there are levels to service, and they follow the same pattern as the levels of consciousness in deep meditation. So the first level of service is where we become, first of all, it's the kind of activity that isn't tied to the ego, that's the given. But there's the kind of service where we're very, very concentrated on what we're doing. You know, in a work day, you can work with people and they're chattering and they're kind of doing this and they're wandering around and they don't get very much done. And you get next to another person, I see only the weeds, only the weeds, only the flowers. I see only the flowers. And they've got that deep sense of concentration. They end up the end of the day with a lot done. So the first level of deep service is where we're really concentrated on what we're doing. That relates to dharana in the state of meditation. But it's instead of the prana withdrawn and concentrated, it's the prana in activity but focused, clear, deep, concentrated activity. If we can hold that, then we can get to another level of seva that relates roughly to dhyana, which is absorption. And this might be someone who their whole life is seva, and they don't see themselves as different from their service anymore. One could imagine that that state of consciousness might have been there with Mother Teresa or some of her nuns. At least from the outside, we don't think of Mother Teresa so much as a personality, as a symbol, as a manifestation of service. So her personality, in other words, has not only become concentrated, but absorbed into the aspect of service. And so all of us should be, especially those who have given their whole life to God and to this path. In our activity, we should try to become absorbed in that activity to the extent that there's not really very much thought of self or self as the doer in it. We leave that. But is there a counterpart in activity to samadhi? You know, samadhi happens when not only is the energy withdrawn from the body, but it goes out through the spiritual eye and expands into cosmic consciousness or into Christ consciousness. Well, I don't know for sure, but there are states that happen to people. I remember reading from a book, oddly enough, by a basketball player, Bill Russell, and he said he was one of the great basketball players. He said there were times when he was playing basketball that he went into an altered state, and other athletes have expressed this also. He said that he would be on the court, he knew what he was doing, but it was as if he was in all of the players. He knew what every player was doing. He knew where the movement was. He knew where the ball was going. It was as if there was a cosmic flow and he was connected to that cosmic flow. And he said that could go on for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. And it would be broken as soon as one of the players did something that was selfish. Isn't that interesting? So I don't know, but I think there's a higher level of service at which the consciousness, even while active, expands outside of the physical body and outside of the sense of selfhood. But that's a high level. But at any rate, so the second chapter is about God serving God. So we not only need to feel that God is the doer, but there is no one else except God who is the receiver. And so it's important in our service and in our life, not just service, in all aspects of our life, it's important to try to develop the attitude that it's not me giving to you, it's God acting through me, giving to God in the form of you. If we can hold that in relationships, for instance, relationships become beautiful. If we can hold it in our service, service becomes expansive and beautiful. So God serving God is the necessary step of attitude or consciousness that allows true Ananda Seva to take place. Again, always coming back to the central point, the central axis of the book, is that these are the things, if we do them rightly, that will bring us to liberation, that will bring us out of the ego, that will bring us into union with God, because it's the counterpart of meditation, but it's that ego-freeing element in activity. Then I was writing the third chapter because if what we're trying to do in service is not only serve so that it's freeing to our consciousness, but even more importantly, serve in such a way that those that we're helping, it helps them free their consciousness. See, we have to, if we're serving to a person or to a group of people, we have to look not at the body and personality, we have to look at the arc of their journey toward freedom, toward moksha. Not just our own journey, but their journey also. And so we need to serve in such a way that helps them take their appropriate next steps along the pathway of liberation. And as we do that, we begin also to take our next steps along the pathway of liberation. So as we serve others in that spirit, then attitude with which we serve is much more important than the form of service. See, it doesn't matter whether you're, I don't know, washing dishes or standing giving a class. The attitude with which you serve is the whole of it, because we're working with consciousness here. We're not working with, and yet, you know, how much of life is, the ego is so concentrated on the form of the service and the status one gets through that form of service and all of those things that just contract the ego again. But attitudes actually become the central aspect in service. So then thinking about attitudes, there are hundreds of attitudes. Attitudes are particular leaning of the consciousness. It can be habits, or it can be, mental inclinations that help determine how we feel or how we act in certain situations. Well, there are hundreds of them. So how to present that in any, in an understandable form. So in the book, I'm going to concentrate on 3 clusters of attitudes. The first cluster are those attitudes that get energy moving and allow anything to happen, because for ourselves or for others, if a ship is not moving, You can turn the steering wheel all you want, and it just doesn't matter. And so you can't get toward a goal without movement. Then, after movement is there, you can begin to steer it. So the first cluster of attitudes are those things that allow the energy to really move. Obviously, this is the attitudes and practices, and then habits of will. Master said his highest prayer is, I will reason, I will, I will act, but guide thou my thought, reason, and activity to the right path in everything. And so that movement of will, that energy of flowing, Master said will is desire plus energy directed toward a goal. So those attitudes such as willingness and enthusiasm, because will can seem a little grim, enthusiasm, determination, the desire to stick with something, concentration. In fact, in the book, I quote, in one of my blogs, I gave what I called a formula for success that works in any endeavor, in business, in sports, in everything. Formula for success. Will plus concentration plus determination or intensity plus duration equals success. So will plus concentration plus intensity plus duration equals success in any project. Well, those are all aspects of the flow of will. And so in the third chapter, I give that cluster of attitudes, which I won't go on, I'm beginning to run out of time here, which help that will to get flowing and the energy to flow through us. And then obviously we have to allow that energy to do what we were talking about earlier, allow that energy to be conceived of as the flow of prana, universal prana, God flowing through us to accomplish whatever goal is there. The next cluster of attitudes I talk about is those attitudes of the heart. Because in service, one of the great, great things about Ananda Seva, or true Seva, is that it opens the heart. The heart is the many things, but it is the center of love in the body, but it is also the center of the reactive process in the body. And so by bringing that reactive element in selflessness, in giving and caring, so the attitudes of the heart are things like love, but its expressions. Friendship, Master said friendship is the purest expression of love because it doesn't have compulsion. Being a parent, you have a kind of a compulsive element to it. Two male, female, or two lovers together, there's a kind of a compulsive element to that. But friendship, he said, is the freest, except for the guru-disciple relationship. So friendship, compassion, selflessness, caring. Let's see, I've listed a couple more of them. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is very important if we hold on to things that poisons the heart. And finally, being even-minded and cheerful, because remember, the heart is the reactive element too. And so that helps us to, Master said that's the key attitude to have, being even-minded and cheerful, because it stops that reactive process. Then finally, I concentrate on what I call attitudes of the soul. And rightly or wrongly in this, what I'm doing is to take each of the aspects of God. You know, God traditionally has 8 aspects. You know, there's light, sound, power, wisdom, joy, peace, calmness, and love. So each of those has attitudes associated with it. So attitudes of peace and harmony, attitudes, I've already talked about love, but the attitudes of joy, of producing an aura around you of doing your seva with joy. Swami said joy is the solution, not the reward. So at the end of our meditation, if we can feel joy, and then if we can serve with that bubble of joy around us, that is much, much more powerful in changing consciousness than thinking, if I grimly get through this, my reward at the end of the day will be, or the end of this life will be, that I'm joyful. So it doesn't work that way. So attitudes of the soul are those things that will help us. Then I'll go into other chapters about techniques of service, things that really help. I'm going to, with his permission, use Bharat's flow learning, where you awaken enthusiasm and then you get a focus and so on. I will also talk about Master's psychological chart, because if we're talking about the arc of movement of the soul to moksha, then there are succinct stages in that, from the as Swami puts them in the book Education for Life. There's heavy, there's egocentric, leaning toward heavy, egocentric, leaning toward, or ego-active, leaning toward heavy, or ego-active, leaning toward light, and there's light. And it also relates to the 4 traditional castes of India. But the way we serve a person who is, let's say, ego-active, moving toward light, which is Vaishya consciousness, is different than the way we would serve someone who's light. The rewards that we would give them. For somebody who's egocentric or a Vaishya consciousness, a merchant consciousness, as we talked yesterday, we have to reward them with something that they want. They still have a little greedy element to their consciousness. So, paint the wall and we'll all go out for ice cream. That kind of thing. The next level is the kshatriya, or that you're supposed to be doing your duty. That's your consciousness. Your happiness comes from helping other people. So that's paint the wall. Isn't it wonderful how we've been able to help? And they don't need the ice cream. And then finally there's the light, or that's the Brahman consciousness. You don't even need to talk to them. Just kind of, as Master said, his best teaching was when he only had to raise an eyebrow. So you just raise an eyebrow toward the wall, and they're so in tune, they think, oh, the wall needs painting, let's all do that. See, so we're working with that arc. So these are all kinds of techniques and ways that we can help understand. And I'll talk about other things in there that we should all work with, efficient methods. We should look at how successful people become successful, the attitudes that they have, the ways that they work, things like that, so that in our service we become effective. Because ultimately, our service, for those of us who are here, we're in service of Master. We're in service of the Guru. And everything that we do, if it has that alignment, that what we're here to do is to serve God and serve Guru, then that forms the focus of our life. I'll just end by saying that some years ago, Devi and I got a reading in India, a Nadi reading, it's called. It's like a Bhrigu reading. Very, it was astoundingly accurate. But at one point, he was reading Sanskrit off of old palm leaves, and he said, "You have never done any business." And I said, oh no, that's not true. I started at the early stages of Ananda, I started an incense and oils business. And, had to do all the things that a business person is supposed to do. So I said, no, I started a business. And he looked and kind of looked up and he said, was that for your personal benefit or was that to help your guru's work? And I said, oh, it was to help the guru's work. He said, that isn't business. That's guru seva. And so I know that there is some thought, erroneous thought, among people in the community or elsewhere, that there's a difference in the type of service that people are doing. I'm just doing business. That's not it. We're here to build master's work, to produce the living example of a community that is led from high principles and high consciousness. And if we do whatever we're doing in that mode of consciousness, it is not business, it's guru seva. And if we hold on to those elements that I've been talking about, our activity is not work, it's not just activity, it is Ananda seva.
So, just to start off with, before we get into our topic, a little update on the book Touch of Joy. Thanks to the remarkable marketing efforts of Sita Bhaivani and the others in Crystal Clarity, that book reached #1 yesterday. Wait. In the category of yoga, but now we've also set our goals very high. We're trying to see if it can be in the top 100 in the general books. Now it's 723rd out of millions of books that Amazon offers. So today the book is actually offered for sale. So if we go online on Amazon and order it today, even though I noticed it's already sold out, but but they're reprinting more, so it will be soon available. And anyway, this is such a beautiful occurrence to happen, and it's really due to the Ananda Seva of many, many people.
So if you haven't ordered, please do so today. And if you have ordered, do so again today.
To be honest, we've ordered several copies. So, well, I want to share with you, Jyotish talked about this experience where we were having a discussion about the charitable, in India, the charitable trust with Diana, who most of you know, Pia, who you know indirectly. She's a great, very great soul and a dear friend and one of the pillars of our work in India. So we were in India, true, but I want to give you the scene of where we were. We were near Rishikesh, near Drongiri Mountain, in that area of the foothills of the Himalayas. We were staying in a little guest house near a place called Abbott Mount. It's a beautiful guest house, very, very simple, from the British colonial era, so it's not new. It's kind of small wooden rooms and beautiful gardens, though. And you go out into the patio, and this is where we were. We had just finished breakfast, sitting outside, and there are the Himalayas, Nanda Devi and some of the others, Trilok and different ones. And so we were sitting there talking about the work, and and this was where the inspiration for all this came from. But I want to kind of take the theme Jyotish has been developing with so much clarity and inspiration, and just look at it from a slightly different perspective. Because we were talking about the work in Vrindavan. And as Jyotish was sharing, the love and the devotion and the personal caring for the individual and lifting their consciousness. And that's part of it. But there's another part that I believe in India is even more important right now. It's very efficient. We look at the finances, they're totally transparent because in India a lot of charitable works get very infiltrated with corrupt officials. We have computer readouts of all the people we're serving, how we're helping them, what medications they need for thousands of people. This is setting a new model for service in India, where it's kind of inefficient, corrupt perhaps, just not looking at the details. And all of the other charitable organizations in Vrindavan are starting to look at what we're doing. And they're starting to say, why are these people so magnetic? Why all of our staff wear little blue jackets? And the word on the street is, if you're in trouble, go to somebody with a blue jacket. And we could go on at length, inspiring stories of what's happened. But as we talked with Pia, and Pia was educated in the West. She went to Wharton School of Business and has done many successful large business operations in India. But we began to see how important it was in Seva in India to bring Western methods of efficiency. And that's what's making a big, big difference. But now we come, and as we sat there talking about it, and it was from there that Jyotish was inspired to write the book, what came to me also was, I mean, how often have we read and heard and talked about Babaji's mission is to blend, or the mission of our masters, Western efficiency, that's what we've specialized in, with Eastern spirituality. Okay, let's take that a step further. If we're bringing Western efficiency to Seva in India, then we need to bring Eastern spirituality to our Seva in America. And that's the difference. Because, you know, as a worldwide community, Sangha, we're efficient. We're very good at it, more or less. At least we value it, let's put it that way. But we need to create a new model. And I'm not sure we're there yet. We need to create a new model, even in an environment like Ananda Village or in some of your meditation groups, or centers, wherever other communities you may come from, where we really transcend, you know, okay, I work in the financial services department. I write paychecks. Are you seeing that as service? Are you spiritualizing that? I work in the expanding light. I teach, but I'm waiting for my paycheck to come in because I've got to pay my bills. And so we're swimming in polluted water in the West, where it's very hard to transcend the thought that I have a job and I have to pay income tax and all these things that we do. And so we've got, just as hard as it is in India to kind of, although it's changing because of so much Indians coming to the West, but to say, how do we make what we're doing? We've got the spirituality deep. How do we make it efficient? Well, in the West, yeah, we've got the efficiency deep, but how do we all the time transcend the thought that we're working at a job? And even at Ananda Village, where we have very, very, very modest wages, still there's an exchange mentality. And we've got to, through attuning to what's trying to happen, we've got to start looking at how do we really spiritualize this? And our whole path, our line of gurus, look what's been given to us. Lahiri Mahashaya, working as an accountant in the British engineering division of the British military. Even after he went up to Babaji's cave and was initiated, still for decades, he went to the office. He did bookkeeping. And there's Sri Yukteswar. You know, as Master describes his ashram, it was well organized, it was efficient, there wasn't any waste. He made, if a meal was prepared for a small group and a large group came, food was found for everyone. So again, efficiency. This is woven into our line of gurus. And then we come to our own master, coming to the West. And you know, what he did to get this message out is really phenomenal. Just amazing. When we were in India a few years ago, and we were giving a talk in Chennai, and we had done a lot of publicity for it, posters and billboards and signs on the sides of buses and so forth. And then afterwards, some man, an older gentleman, came up to me who had a slightly different leaning, you can guess for yourself. And he said to me, you know, Master didn't do publicity, you know, as if that was a dirty thing. And I just didn't challenge him. I said, well, now we do it to let more people know. Master did fantastic publicity in the West. I mean, you know, we've got the posters, we've got the advertisements, we've got the newsletter. I mean, that's what he saw. That's how you get the word out. We have to be efficient in our service. And so we have this as our woven into our path. And then we come to our beloved Swamiji, who, you know, Master said to him, your life is one of intense activity and meditation. And Swami always commented, he always put meditation second with less emphasis. But these are, again, two of the pillars of our path, sadhana and service. And so many of the things that Master said to Swamiji about service, he said, you must, in everything that you do, you must be intensely aware of what it is you're doing. Not for any personal gain, but just that's what service is about, heightened intensity. I see only the weeds. I remember, some of you know this story, but it was a thrilling moment. And you know, when I think about times I spent with Swamiji, we spent with Swamiji, I would say 85, 90% of them were when we were serving, working on a project with him. And maybe 10% was meditating with him. And those were profound meditations, but nevertheless, that's how he was training us. And once, this was many years ago, and some of you know the story, but Swami was moving from his dome at the meditation retreat over to his dome at Crystal Hermitage. At the time, that's all that existed. And it wasn't finished on the inside. It still needed interior work, painting and so forth. But he wanted to move in. So we were all at breakfast up at the meditation retreat, those of us who lived there. And he came into the dining room and he said, who wants to help me paint my house? And inside. And everybody who could said, oh, we want to. So I was part of the group. We got a ride down and we started painting the interior of the dome. And we worked in the morning, and then Swami said, let's take a break, and we had lunch. And then he said, okay, let's come back at 1:30 and we'll continue. So we came back at 1:30, and my job, you know, there's that great big hexagonal picture window looking over at the Yuba River Valley. My job was, it was rough wood on those beams. So I had to sand the beams and then stain them, and it was time consuming because the wood was quite rough. And so I was up on a scaffold and we were all working and working and working. I think I took my watch off because I was painting and we were working and working and working. And then, you know, all I saw was those beams and the wood and how impossible it was to get that stain evenly in the wood. And then finally Swami said, okay, it's been a good day. Let's break for the day. And then we all looked at the clock and it was 2:00 in the morning. And we had worked we'd worked 12 hours, from 2 in the afternoon to 2 in the morning. We weren't tired. We didn't know how much time had gone by. He was giving us the blessing of just focus. That's what service is about. So Another thing that Swami Master said to Swami is, be calmly active and actively calm. And calmly active, I think, could be the Swami's subtitle. One of my favorite activities that we spent with him was helping him to pack, which was for a trip, which was a frequent occurrence, as you can imagine, because he was always, some of you in the room have been part of this, Lakshman and others, and he would be, he kind of played the part of a rather frail old man. I'll just sit here and you all, and so we thought, okay, Swami, we'll help. And he must have had 10 of us running around in circles. Oh, could you get that shirt? Could you get that microphone? Could you get those batteries? And he was just the eye of the storm, calmly active. And we were all running around, putting all the things in the suitcase and trying to close the suitcase. And, that needs to be ironed, and somebody's ironing it. It was the most fun experience. And by extension, that's what he's done with all of Ananda and continues to do. We're all still running around in circles. And he's like, don't you think that book needs to be written? Oh, don't you think that program guy needs to go out? Okay, Swami, okay. And we're running around. But calmly active and actively calm, that's meditation. Actively calm, not passively calm. That's subconscious. Actively calm is superconscious. And so these are things Master said to Swamiji, and we've all been carrying them out. And he said, when you serve God consciously, that is as good as meditation. But, the caveat, the trick is to really serve God consciously. But remember, if we can do that, the power that's generated from that. Now, at Ananda, in the creation of these communities, they are basically renunciate communities, which means we're not doing it for anything we do for personal reward. We have monastics, people have taken vows of celibacy and so forth, but then the rest of us, all of us, are renunciates. We are saying, I am not doing this for personal gain. And this is the beautiful part of what Seva is all about. There's nothing, and we need to understand that if we're doing our service to please other people, that's not quite the right way to do it. If we're doing it only to please God, that's the pure form. Swami said, if you're doing your service for approval from others, that is slavery. If you're doing it to please God, that is freedom and joy. And so that's, again, such an important way to look at things. Oh, I didn't get that promotion. I'm not well thought of. Banish those thoughts. They only get in your way, really. Look at the most unimportant thing you can do. And if it's pleasing to God, that's all that's important. Swami tells the story of when he and one of his brother monks, Norman, were working, I believe it was on the Hollywood church, and they were nailing the studs in the wall that would go underneath the sheetrock that would be totally covered up. And Norman was hammering the nails into these studs to keep that would be covered, to put them in place. And someone came up and said, why are you taking so much concern about those nails, how you're putting them in? No one's going to see them. And Norman, who was a great soul, he passed away some years ago. So the man said, no one's going to see them. And Norman said, Christ will see them. And that's the beautiful thing of not trying to please others, but just to please God. I'll share this story, personal story again about service with Swamiji. But it was such a contrast between, for myself, of doing something for the reward and doing something without any thought of what you're going to get. Some years ago, Swami, he would always was writing a book, and he was working on one, but he would usually take off one day a week just to go into town, do errands. He mainly would go by himself at that time, and maybe would have lunch. And so he told a small group of us, I think it was really 2 or 3 women, he said, when I go to town, maybe you all could come and clean my house for me. And we, oh, wow, so of course, what a great thing. So he took off, and so this was my first time doing it, and I was all excited. And I thought, oh, I want to do a really good job, because if I do a really good job, I'll get praise from him, and then, da-da-da-da-da-da. So we all walked in and we decided what we were going to do. At that time, Swami's house was just the dome, and where that piano is, that upper level was his kitchen. And so I thought, we walked in, I said, okay, I'm going to work on the kitchen. And I walked in and I was determined to do a really good job here. And there were pantry shelves, and I thought, okay, first I'll start by dusting these shelves, because that was in the far back. And there was this paper bag full of green split peas. And it must have been there for quite a long time, because I just touched it, and the bag split. And about 1 pound of green split peas just went all over the kitchen. And I just thought, okay, now this. And so I spent the rest of the time cleaning up the green split peas, and at the end of the time, it was sort of a washout, because that was all I did. I came in, I created a mess, cleaned up the mess, I'm out. And I thought, I don't think I did that just right, So the next week, we were there again, and I thought, I'm not going to worry about anything. I'm going to try to find a very small area and just clean that and forget about it. I hope Swami never even sees what I do, because if I try to get any personal credit, I know it's going to end in disaster. So I looked around and I looked at the shower stall, and it was pretty thick with mildew. So I said, okay, I'm going to go into that shower stall and I'm going to just scrub it. And I was in there all day long, scrubbing. And by the end, it looked good. And I just thought, Swami won't even notice, but at least I didn't damage anything. So we finished, we got all our cleaning supplies, we were leaving. Swami was just coming in, and we said, Swami, we pranam. And he looked, and just sort of generally, he said, I do hope someone cleaned this shower stall. And I just looked down. I knew if I took credit, it would something bad would happen. So I just looked down. But again, don't look at that part of you that says, it's important that I get recognized. It's important that someone says you did a good job. Some years ago, Shivani from Assisi and Arjuna, her husband, and Jyotish and I went to visit the church where the great saint of our time, Padre Pio, great Catholic saint, where he resided for many, many years. He was, if you haven't read about Padre Pio, he's worth reading about. Many, many, many miracles associated. And we had been reading about him. It's on the east coast of Italy, a very small town called San Giovanni Rotondo. And we'd been reading about him. And I had read one book, which I really, really liked. I don't recall the name. But it was written by an Italian monk who had been Padre Pio's personal assistant for decades. And really a very inspiring book. And so we went and then had many, actually quite miraculous experiences happen to us there too, which we don't have time to go into. But then we went into the little bookstore and to get some books to bring home. And there was this very old monk there, and he was serving the people in the bookstore coffee. Italy, you think good coffee. This was instant coffee. And so he was just bringing around. And then I looked, and I thought, I saw, that's the guy who wrote the book. And instead of being important, yes, I was with Padre Pio, there he was. And you would never, and then I kind of went up to him and in broken Italian and said, "Excuse me, sir, is this your book?" You know, he didn't want to take any credit for it. But I'll never forget that moment when I saw that absolute humility and selflessness in that beautiful monk who had spent his life in service. And then finally, we need to, in our life in Ananda, whether we're here, wherever we may be, whether you're watching online, wherever you may be, we need to think of what are the dynamics of group seva? Because we are not in a community for no reason. We are in communities because the seva here, the seva we can learn here, is definitely a path to God. We could go off and serve, be a missionary in some far-reaching place, and we would learn many things. But we learn different things by our group seva. We learn cooperation. We learn harmony. We learn, Swami uses the beautiful example, in groups of people working together, if there are big waves that are inflated by ego, I'm important. What happens to those waves? They just crash together, crash. But if you come, like we were talking yesterday, to a part of the ocean where all the little waves say, I am so unimportant, I don't want anybody to even know that I'm here, then those waves move in a beautiful pattern. And that's what we see at Ananda Village to a great extent. No one's trying to be important. No one's trying to say, look at me. I have to say one of the forms of service in our community that I find so extraordinarily inspiring is looking at what happens to the landscape when selfless souls come in and they clear out all that underbrush. And you just look and you see the light. And you could hire a company to come in. I don't think that light would be there. But when it's done with the thought, I am just serving God. This isn't easy. It's not necessarily what I would choose to do today. But I'm doing this because Swami wanted this to be done. He wanted Ananda to be park-like. Then when you see that, you feel this is seva in the highest form. And so ultimately, what is seva? Seva is the love of our heart for God and for others being expressed through whatever abilities we might have. If it's digging a ditch, if it's painting a wall, if it's taking care of your children, if it's singing a song. Seva is love in action. And if we come back to the pillar of sadhana, we awaken that love through meditation. And then we express it without any thought. When a mother tends a sick child and is up all night, not getting any sleep, does she expect the child to say thank you? Well, if she does, she'll probably be disappointed. But that's not what happens. You just do it because you love. And that's what our lives need to be based on. Love in action that is born from interior consciousness and devotion to God. And if we can, as an Ananda movement, begin awakening this form of activity in the world, again, what is the Dharma of Dwapara Yuga? To express love, to awaken love, for people to see love in action. And this, with the grace of our Guru, we can do.